Okay, so good morning, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for making the time to join us, Regen Brisbane and QSEC, for the fourth in our series of workshops, Beyond 2032, Reimagining Brisbane as a Regenerative City. Before I give us a bit of a recap, what I did want to mention is Regen Brisbane. We're a growing network of individuals and organisations exploring how to make Brisbane a regenerative city. The Olympics were announced shortly after Regen Brisbane was formed up, so it's an important element of our work and our interests, but it's not the main reason that Regen Brisbane exists. And if you haven't already seen it, Regen Brisbane has an emerging website, which is very beautiful, thanks to one of our creators, James Lee. But first, I'd like to acknowledge that I live, work and play on the beautiful lands of the Yagara and Turrbal peoples. So I'd like to acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to acknowledge the remarkable civilizational culture that has cared for country and cared for kin since time immemorial. And as I often like to do in my introductions personally, I'd like to acknowledge the ongoing impacts and legacy of colonisation on First Nations peoples across the continent, and the deep commitment that I have personally and that the organisations I'm involved with, such as the Australian Earth Laws Alliance and the New Economy Network Australia, and now Regen Brisbane, very committed to making people aware of our history and to make a more powerful future by acknowledging our past and making sure that the future is inclusive and supportive of everybody. But what I will do now is I just wanted to remind folks too that back in June we had a forum on the Olympics, and there will be more discussions coming up. And in case there are folks on this call or in the room who haven't been with us before, one of the goals of Regen Brisbane is to help coordinate a people's plan for the Olympics. So if you're super interested in any of that, you've got particular parts of your community that might be affected, or you generally just want to be involved in the research, the writing, and what will be a pretty large task of coordinating some of the input we want people to share, please do get in touch with us at any time. Kira is one of our best points of contact for Regen Brisbane, and I'm sure Kira will pop her email address into the chat now and then, but it's kira@earthlaws.org.au. But now I just wanted to get our minds into today's task. Shortly, I'll be introducing my wonderful co-conspirators, Elise Paraps from QSEC, the Queensland Social Enterprise Council, and Kira Athanasiov from AILA and Regen Brisbane. But just a reminder, folks, so on the 8th of July, we started with a really excellent workshop looking at culture. And we had a number of speakers, including the always wonderful Mary Graham, talking about what it is to build a relationist ethos and to have a culture of deep care, both for country and for each other. And it was really lovely to start our discussions looking at culture. On the 29th of July, we explored what it looks like to have a socially just and inclusive society. And our speakers were from a number of different organisations and groups across Brisbane. On the 19th of August, the project, the topic that speaks most to my heart, I have to admit, the environment. We had a lovely discussion about Brisbane and its ancient river system and the rather remarkable bioregion that we live in. So all of these previous workshops and sessions have been recorded. I think they're nearly all online, and if not, they'll definitely be up online by next week. So do visit the Regen Brisbane workshop. But today we're going to be focusing on, I guess I was going to say, the issue that often dominates our news and unfortunately sometimes dominates our culture, the economy. I personally am very interested in economic issues, particularly where they intersect with caring for or wrecking the natural environment. And I wanted to, before I talk about our program today, give a plug to the New Economy Network Australia, or NENA. The website there is just neweconomy.org.au, and we hope throughout our work within Regen Brisbane that we'll be able to share with you lots of awesome stuff that NENA is up to. Regen Brisbane is officially a local hub for Brisbane inside the New Economy Network, and a lot of the work that we'll be getting up to over the coming year or two will include a very strong focus on how we build a different economic system and how we promote economic activities that are good for people and good for planet. In particular, I want to flag that probably next year, as Regen Brisbane joins with other communities around Australia as part of the Green Prince Adventure in 2023, we will be hosting a new economy symposium, probably towards the beginning of winter. And there'll be a lot of fun opportunities to talk about the economy and to really showcase what Brisbane's economy can be about. But without further ado, I'd now like to invite either Kira or Elise to talk a bit more about, I know that it's important for Elise to tell us updates from the world of QSEC. I think I've just mentioned the program, Elise, while you settle into the mic. So what we're going to do after our welcome and intro is invite our wonderful guest speakers, Emma Kate Rose, Muriel Chamberlain, and Matt Panayi. I hope I've said that right. There'll be a short break. I hope I've got the time right too. And we've got discussion groups and we've got our questions that we'll run through in a moment. But I'll stop sharing so that Elise can say good morning and welcome you. Thanks, Elise.
Hi, everybody and everyone in the room. It's a little bit awkward because we've got the two-speed process happening here. So I will get the speakers to come up and stand in front of the camera here. And we use the microphone so everybody can hear us both in the room and online. So it is a little bit squeaky, but, you know, we'll get there. Hi, everyone online as well. I'd also like to pay my respects to the Indigenous owners of this land, the Yagara and Turrbal people. And at QSEC, the Queensland Social Enterprise Council, we don't just say that, we actually really try and walk that. And it's through the great relationships that we've fostered and nurtured that we hope to gain more wisdom as we travel with Indigenous businesses through social enterprise. So today we are talking about our economy, and it's especially important for social enterprises to play a part in this conversation because, as you know, social enterprises are not just about community service, they're not just about bringing benefits back to communities, but they're also trading. And the reason why social enterprises exist is because they actually really invest all of their profits and their creative juices back into creating an enormous amount of growth in community work and community cohesion. So it's such an important topic for us to discuss because for far too long, we've actually lost our way, I think, as a society. We have really centred our sights on GDP. We've centred our sights on, you know, how might we give back in a way that limits our loss of profit. We've looked at it from a deficit model, and I know Matt will be talking a little bit more about that. You know, how much can we afford to lose from our profit in order to give back to community? We actually need to flip that a little bit on its head. Through COVID, we've seen that the system has not been supportive of a lot of the social and environmental goals and aspirations that our society really wants to continue. So social enterprises lean into that space. We do, of course, make profit. We have to. We have a growing population. We have demands on our population for food, for safety, for belonging, for connection. We need to turn that profit back into benefits for our community, not just the single bottom line and not just to advance corporations. So here we are, strap in. It's going to be an exciting session today. As we know, in the next few weeks, and we've discussed in this room for a little while now, the Social Enterprise World Forum is coming up in 27th and 28th of September. During that 2-day period, we'll be having a graphic recorder, actually taking the ideas and the things that we've positioned through these last 4 sessions and bringing it to light through a drawing process. And people throughout that, throughout those 2 days will actually be able to participate in these conversations where they see that we've perhaps missed a few points or wanted to strengthen an argument or create more of a connection. They'll be able to participate on the floor, and the graphic recorder will be able to put that into the visual image that we create at the end of the Social Enterprise World Forum. And then the wonderful team at Regen Brisbane will be continuing this conversation. It's important to note that these 4 sessions were just the beginning of what we need to do now to really start to enact how we want this city to look, not just for the Olympics, not just bright, shiny, not just, how do we want to seem on the outside? We actually want to have a better, more connected social framework and regenerative city to be able to do our business and create more value. So I'm going to see if we can move a little bit earlier than we were going to on the schedule. I know we've got busy days today, and I'm going to just try and speed it up just a tad. I've got a few people in the room who've got things to get on with as well. So I'm going to start with Emma Kate Rose. Oh, Michelle, do you want to do an intro to the wonderful speakers, or are you happy for me to?
Oh, no, I'm happy for you to do it, Elise. The one thing I needed to say, and I do apologise, folks, for various reasons I can't stay today, but Paul Bishop is kindly looking after our online group. And I just wanted to mention, for our online group to provide their input, I'm sharing a Google Doc into the chat. And that Google Doc already has the 4 questions that we'll be discussing in our breakouts. So Paul will be helping the online folks do their thing, while Kira and Elise, of course, are helping folks in the room. But other than that, yeah, I'm really happy to hand over to you and everyone in the room, Elise. So please continue, and thank you.
Fabulous. No worries. Emma Kate Rose was very recently a project officer for the Next Economy, looking at how we transition to a more sustainable and better energy system for the whole of Queensland and across the nation. And is one of the founders and stalwarts of Food Connect, one of our fabulous social enterprises in Queensland, and has done incredible work bringing the food system up to date and looking at the ways of having a fairer food system for all. So Emma Kate Rose was also the director and a board director, is currently a board director, and also has been a president of the Queensland Social Enterprise Council for some years. So I'm delighted to introduce Emma Kate Rose today.
Thanks, everybody. I would also like to acknowledge, before I start, traditional owners on the land on which we stand, the Turrbal and the Yagara people, and acknowledge the elders, past and present. I have been told not to acknowledge emerging because they're not elders yet. So that's just a tip for newcomers. But it is different for different groups, so I'm not presuming anything, but that's how we've been told to do it at Food Connect Shed. And just on that, at Food Connect Shed, we have been working towards a governance system where we want to embed Indigenous epistemology into our constitution, into our ways of being at the shed, and we've taken most people on the board and in the tenants, as well as any supporters out there who are around the Food Connect space, to participate in black card training, but also specific workshops that we hold there with Aunt Lila Watson and her nieces Gala and Tila Watson. They're an important part of the fabric of the Food Connect Shed and have been instrumental in helping us guide our principles of operating and our ethics of operating at the shed. So, and I think that kind of segues nicely into our talk today around what does the new economy look like. I come from a couple of different spaces. I recently resigned from my position at the Next Economy, but was there for nearly 3 years and got to experience some of the fundamental changes that are happening. So in the energy space, in the energy transition at the moment. But I just wanted to get an idea from, and I can see the chat, so feel free to chat in here. I just wanted to get an idea from the room, who's across the donut economy stuff from Kate Rayworth and her work around, or at the very least, who's aware of the limits to growth and the fact that we live on a planet that has finite resources, and the economic model that we've put in place over the last couple of 100 years is one of an extractive model that relies on a false science of economics that requires it to continually grow exponentially, regardless of whether or not we have finite resources. So juxtapose that with the millennia of wisdom and knowledge of Indigenous cultures all over the world, who learned over thousands and thousands and thousands of years, not just how to manage their resources well for their generations, but also for 7, 8, 9 generations after them, and all doing so in a spirit of reciprocity, in a spirit of abundance mentality, and in a spirit of you know, acknowledging that humans are intertwined with the environment and the country that we live on and depend so heavily on. So I think we're seeing, just through my work recently and also over the 18 years at Food Connect, we are really starting to see, although I would have liked this to happen about 10 years ago, that when we did have a little bit of momentum politically, we're starting to see people like Jim Chalmers, our treasurer, talk about a chapter in the budget that he's going to be releasing in October, addressing the wellbeing economy, which is huge. And if you haven't noticed that, or you haven't seen that in the news, go and find out about it, and maybe you send him a letter encouraging him to talk more about that. So, and then we're also seeing economies around the world like Scotland, Iceland, I think Finland, and there was a fourth one, New Zealand, have all got together and all interestingly led by women, prime ministers, to work together towards their own wellbeing economies in their own countries. So that's it, the ball's starting to roll there. We're yet to see the impacts of those policies. The early indications are that they're really positive in terms of health outcomes, social outcomes, environmental outcomes. However, we need to be mindful that we're entering into a tricky time economically in terms of the global economy, and what that means is we will see the people in power with vested interests doubling down even more than we've ever seen before on business as usual, because it will serve their interests to preserve that. So we're going to be seeing, and I think if some of you aren't aware, there's a great book that's just come out called Living Democracy by Tim Hollow. He's based in Canberra. He's a musician and an activist and a Greens candidate. But he calls this phase that we're about to go through as the interregnum, which is probably a fancy word for chaos. So don't be scared. But as humans, we like stability. We don't like to change too much. We like to have certainty in our lives. But as we've seen through the pandemic and through recent climate events, we're in a new era now of constant change, and change is the constant. Change is the new normal. So being able to develop skills within ourselves for resilience, but also with our communities, but also have that global outreach has never been more important for us. I'll touch on some of the work that we've done at the Next Economy. So the Next Economy is based on the principles of feminist economics, or the diverse economies framework. And basically, it's just basically, how do we create an economy that benefits everybody, not just people, but also all the living beings on the planet? And how do we put people and the planet before profit, or at least on an equal par with profit? So what we do is we get invited into communities. We don't impose ourselves, we just wait for the invitation. And lately that's been in Gladstone, in central Queensland, where they're experiencing rapid energy transition. So they've got massive, it's sort of known as the carbon capital of Australia, Gladstone. It has Rio Tinto is there. We've got cement, some of the nation's biggest cement makers there, aluminium, steel, and it's also hosts a major port to export gas as well as coal to the rest of the world. So, you know, it's actually right on the doorstep of the Southern Great Barrier Reef, and you just need to take a boat like an hour and a half, 2 hours further east from Gladstone, and you're on the most beautiful Heron Island and heritage, like, I don't know if it's World Heritage listed island of Heron Island. Just absolutely gorgeous. And then to see this massive industrial port right on its doorstep is quite a place of extremes. And it comes up a lot politically in elections, state and federal elections, even local elections, because it represents all the diversity within our economy at every extreme. And so there's a lot of interest groups in Gladstone fighting for their agendas. So being invited into Gladstone is not an easy thing to do on the ground, but we hosted some conversations we kept the politicians out of the rooms, but we did invite bureaucrats because they're an important part of the piece, and council officers and councillors, because councillors generally have their community's best interest at heart. And they've got to figure out what happens on the ground. So we didn't exclude them. But we had major industry in the room. We had universities, we had unions, we had environment groups, we had investment firms, and we invited them to, over 2 days, to have a conversation about this transition and what it looks like. And it was a catalytic event. It was at just before Easter last year. And since then, we've seen huge changes, and we're now TNE is now working on a 10-year economic, not energy, but economic transition roadmap for the regional councils. So not just Gladstone Council, but all of the Central Queensland region. And it's been quite amazing to see. So sometimes we don't see that leap. Sometimes we kind of see, you know, we still see business as usual on the news and in mainstream media and everything, and we don't see that massive leap from, you know, living in the dark ages almost, or in denial, to people actually on the ground putting forward a 10-year roadmap to get out of fossil fuels. You know, people like Rio Tinto with you know, I mean, that's just amazing to have that conversation and to see that actually happening. So that's been exciting work. And the other work that we do, of course, is in the food system. The food system is a very complex beast, and Food Connect has been tackling this in a local way on the ground to try and address some of or demonstrate a different way of doing things. You know, to set up a local economy for farmers, makers, and everyone in the value chain right through to eaters. And we've used Brisbane as our demonstration site, and we have a thing called the Brisbane Food Plan, where we look at where should Brisbane get its food from? And we look at that question through 4 different lenses. So we look at it from a social justice point of view, we look at it through an environmental lens, through an economic lens, and through a human health lens, and also a governance lens. And what we've come up with is the Brisbane Food Plan, which basically sort of maps out not just geographically where we should be getting our food from in the region, but also you know, what does it look like? Where does the money go, and who benefits from that? So I think, you know, with these massive transitions in, you know, particularly with climate change, we have to be quite concerned about where our food comes from, and we have to start developing skills in not just growing food ourselves or in our communities, but also you know, collaborating. So at Food Connect, we have sort of 3 main goals, and we say that we want to decouple from fossil fuels. So we try and do that by creating very short supply chains between the eater and the grower. And we also try and you know, there's still fossil fuel involved in that in terms of transport, but we're slowly building up our electric vehicle fleet from our end to try and distribute to our customers. On the farming end, we deal with a lot of very small family farms. A lot of them don't really have a great need for fossil fuels in their growing. Most of them grow regeneratively. They look after their soils. In fact, next week, we're going out all week to 4 different regions within southeast Queensland to help our farmers with soil experts on how to improve the health of their soils and capture more carbon. But also, so that's the decouple from fossil fuels bit. We also want to divorce ourselves from market forces, because the whole idea around food as a commodity ignores the fact that it's actually a public good or a human right to actually be able to access good, healthy, nutritious food. And to have food sovereignty means we need to look at food in a completely different way in terms of social justice and who gets to eat good food and who gets to access food that's culturally appropriate and grown in a way that's beneficial for the environment as well. The other one is, and so with that, the way we do that on the ground is our farmers aren't subjected to the market. So if you have a look at Coles and Woolies on any weekly basis, you'll see huge fluctuations in different lines of fruit and veg or any other products. Although I noticed an ad on Coles last night when I was watching the Lions beat Richmond, that they advertised a price freeze on all their food until January 2023, which is very interesting, to help the cost of living. So whether that's just marketing, I don't know, social wash as we like to call it, or reality for them in terms of trying to attract customers that they've maybe lost over the last 6 months or so. I'm not sure. We don't really keep too much of an eye on it because we like to focus on what we do. But it was just interesting to see that. So we lock our farmers in. They tell us the price. We go by a true cost of production model. So they tell us how much it costs them to grow their food and transport it to us. And we say, great, if that's how much it costs you, let's lock it in. Let's not worry about what the market's doing. And as long as you're providing for your household and your family and you're putting some of that money into some further research, improving your on-farm food, farm viability in terms of environmental biodiversity corridors, water catchments, whatever that is, then let's agree to that price. And so we have a number, like we've got, you know, a few thousand dedicated customers who are happy to support farmers that way, and they can budget. They can budget 2 years ahead if they want to. There's going to be very little fluctuation in their food budget by buying with Food Connect. And the other third pillar is to collaborate for good. So we know that we've got all the solutions in the world to fix all of the problems in the world. And the last frontier is humans getting along. And so by creating a space, which is the Food Connect Shed, to facilitate communities to come in and collaborate around all sorts of ideas. It doesn't have to be around food. Mariel, who's speaking next, she'll tell you she's a tenant at the Food Connect Shed, and we try and encourage as many conversations around different types of economic sectors and systems to create an alternative economy that's beneficial for everybody and fair for everyone. So look, I don't know if I've run out of time or you want me to talk more, if there's any questions. Yep. Okay. Yep.
We've kind of gone through, here are our questions for the day. We've got, what is the economy for? Eric H has, I'm going to share the stage with you just for a minute. You've already sort of mentioned, you know, what is the economy for? It's actually, you know, it's got to be not just market led. You know, when you talked about Woolworths finding in their hearts to, you know, stick the Coles, was it? Stick the price of food at a particular level. My question would be, how does that impact the farmers as the cost of living actually goes up? How does that impact the people who are producing the food? What does that look like? That might be sensible for the people who are buying it and for people to come into Coles and purchase, but what does it actually look like on the ground? Is that a market decision that they've made actually what's driving the economy, and how is that equitable? And you've already just mentioned also some of the economic levers that we'll be looking at today, food being one of them, and the other one energy and also transportation in terms of decoupling from fossil fuels. And you've also touched on global challenges and opportunities, which is what some of the questions we'll be asking in groups as well. So just amazing. Thank you so much. Good. But question from me. Yeah. So you've mentioned a little bit about the global challenges and opportunities. And I would like to ask a little bit more around what does that look like for building a framework for us to go beyond 2032. You know, some of those global challenges are out there. What are the great opportunities for Brisbane and SEQ through some of those economic levers that you've just mentioned?
Yeah. Well, I think we need to definitely support the pioneers. So like in terms of the people that are on the ground doing all this, there's so much happening. Yeah, you don't have to look very far in Brisbane. There's amazing things happening across every economic sector. So instead of kind of feeling, oh, it's all a bit overwhelming, I need to start something myself, you don't actually have to. Just join the people who are already doing it and ask them, you know, how can I help? There's so many skills that are required. There's a lot of work to do. And that will help strengthen the grassroots community enterprises and social enterprises that are, you know, making their mark currently in Brisbane, and it's growing. One of the things that I've heard Catherine Trebek, who's a great economist, she set up the Wellbeing Economy for All, or We All. She speaks about this concept called pre-distribution. So a lot of people say, oh, we need to get the wealthy to redistribute their wealth and then everything will be fine. And she talks about, no, let's look more upstream. Let's look at how they can't get that stupidly wealthy in the first place. So let's look at pre-distribution. So, you know, if you want to start a business on the back of slavery, on the back of environmental destruction, should you be allowed to operate? It's a simple question, you know. So where are the policy levers that allow us to, and I mean, because we can't, every business says it's up to the consumer to determine, it's up to the market to determine what we do next. That's bullshit. Sorry for swearing, but that is total bullshit. And it's just kicking the can down the road, and it just, you know, they're just in denial. Because they know that as soon as, you know, a government comes along and says, actually, we might just interfere a little bit in this bit of the market because it's just creating havoc. So pre-distribution is a really interesting concept that I'm going to start getting my teeth into around, you know, how can we, and then, you know, a way of doing that is looking at social enterprise. Social enterprise internalise those externalities. Social enterprise look at all of that stuff before they even open their doors, because they're mission-led in that way. B Corp certification, you know, although, you know, when I hear Unilever getting B Corp certification, I kind of tend to roll my eyes and think, I don't know, need to look into that a bit more. So, I mean, it's good. I mean, the corporates know, the big corporates know that the writing's on the wall and things are shifting. Whether that beast is quick enough to change in the 8 years that we've got left, I don't know. Same with government policy. And so that's why, yes, we need all of that. We need political change. It's great to see community independence coming in and rattling the cage at the federal level. It's great to see, you know, things like the Indigenous voice to Parliament coming through and, you know, getting us all aware of land rights, because land rights is not just an Indigenous issue, it's for everyone. If we can solve the land issue, we can solve a lot of problems. But also doing it on the ground, because that's where you get your juice from. That's where it feels real. That's where it, you know, you can create change, and that's where the joy comes from too. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but anyway, that's just my thoughts for now.
Mission-led, not
Yeah.
market-led. Very nice. Kira, do you mind popping up and getting Muriel's presentation slides up while I introduce Muriel?
Paul, did you have something that you needed to say before we start?
Yes, I just wanted to suggest two things. For those online in particular, please have a look at the questions in the Google Doc and just consider entering thoughts that occur to you in response to the questions as the speakers are talking. That would help just to make sure we capture the information as ideas come up. We will go into the discussion after the speakers, but the other thing is, if people in the room have the microphone, could they please be in front of the screen so we can hear them? When they walk away from the screen, we can't hear the audio so well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Hi everyone, good morning. As I say, my name is Marielle Chamberlain from Full Circle Fibres. I think I actually named this business before circular economy was a widely known term. I've got some slides to run through, and then I'm going to run through a little bit of a Imagine 2030, and I'll apologise for having that to kind of read off, but I want to make sure I include it all. So bear with me, please. Yeah, I'm a textile scientist, and I'm originally from the UK, and yeah, I've been in the industry 25 years. And I'm just going to nod to my heritage here because I'm Welsh. And this, I was looking for an image that was okay to use with Creative Commons of a Celtic knot. And what's interesting about Celtic knots is they're endless and they're in balance. And sometimes they are several different loops that are endless but intertwined with each other. And I couldn't help thinking that that part of my heritage was incredibly related to the circular economy that we're talking about today.
It's not sharing online.
Oh.
Wrong screen.
And so part of that as well from being Welsh, I also grew up in South Wales. I grew up at the time of the miners' strike. I grew up at the time of the deindustrialisation of the UK. And I grew up learning about the good, the bad and the ugly of the Industrial Revolution and what that meant to be proud of and what that meant to be broken back. And where I'm from, where my father's from in South Wales, that's the coal industry. And then I've ended up in the textile industry, which has, quite frankly, a rather horrible history and still a current horrible legacy too. So yeah, this is kind of how I live and breathe, I guess. And so I bring my Welsh heritage as well as now living in Queensland for nearly 20 years. So the global textile industry, 110 million tonnes of fibre a year. This graph just is really quick to run you through. The green bars and the ones above it show you what's natural fibre, mostly cotton, and the orange bars show you what's synthetic fibre, all from oil. Where's all the growth from? So as we're busy getting out of plastic, what are they pushing? Polyester. That's forecast to get to 150 million tonnes by 2030. Yeah, right. So this is huge. This is a huge part of our global footprint. There are various squabbles over whether we're 10% or 20% or 5% or whatever, but whatever it is, it's hideous. So we need to reduce it. What's interesting is the amount of natural fibre use hasn't really changed in 20 years. I acknowledge my very good friend Jane Milburn here. She was a big contributor to War on Waste, and it was her calculations that estimated then that just in Australia, we are 6 tonnes of textiles to landfill every 10 minutes. Most of that is fast fashion polyester. And in the context of the Olympics, merch, volleys uniforms, horrible kind of easy sublimated polyester polo shirts that are sweat bags. I could go on. And the carbon footprint. So if we actually want to reduce the carbon footprint that's attributed to sports apparel and just footwear even, this is a graph from a major brand. Somebody's fiddling with my slides here to help.
you can see that the trajectory we're on is frightening as far as predicted global greenhouse gas emissions if we carry on as we are based on current growth rates. So we not only need to level out, we need to start reducing big time if we're going to take out the carbon and emissions footprint of textiles. So what does that mean? Everybody likes to associate it with fashion. Is it all this? I think most people on this call probably do not personally identify with this picture. They maybe think that's not me. But is it you? Are we part of it? Is this all the impact is? What about this? Oh, what are you sat on? If you're in here, you're on a plastic chair, but you might be on an upholstered chair at home. You might be treading on carpet. There are textiles everywhere in our lives. And lots of people like to push the whole problem onto the fashion industry. And don't get me wrong, there are plenty of problems in the fashion industry, but we consume a hell of a lot of that, 110 million tons in our essential use. And which means it's also an industry that we have to engage with, we have to be part of, and we have to find a way to do it in balance. So yeah, there's some scissors, but there's also a bandage. There's also a swab. Has anybody ever imagined running out of those things? Can we make them for ourselves? What would it look like if the supply chains turned off? What would it look like if we didn't have enough clothes for these guys? I'm just going to put this into perspective right now with the current global situation. We currently can make the fabric for that garment here. We can't make the yarn. We can treat the fabric to be fire retardant here. We can't make the thread to sew it up. We can't make the zip it goes on with. A lot of the fabric in that space is made in Europe. 3 months ago, before the major water and energy shortages, the lead times on those fabrics were already out from 2 months to 6 months. Imagine in amongst everything else we're dealing with, we actually don't have the clothes to protect the people who are helping us cope. This isn't just about fashion. Gotta have a hose to hold a hose, right? So within that rubbery hose is actually a very special woven textile that is woven in a tube so that it can take the high pressure. That's textile science. I'm a textile scientist. We're not just in fashion, we're in everything that keeps you safe and well. Can't even study textile science anymore in Australia. So what do? Well, we've been having some fun looking at decommissioning. What does it look like to bring recycling back to Australia? This was some work we did with World's Biggest Garage Sale, and we timed what it would look like to take apart some work shares. So I actually don't want to fill everybody with doom and dread. There are some actually cool things we can do. And it's quite fun. Look at that, all those buttons. How many buttons get thrown away? And we actually trialed some ragging. The trial's partway through, but this was actually done at Sealy. Sealy actually rag a lot of textiles to make the inner pads in their mattresses here in Wacol. Here's one of the many pictures of the circular economy. The circular economy gets talked about a lot. There are lots of these butterfly pictures. It's actually about people who do the doing. It's about manufacturing. There's no remanufacturing without manufacturing. And if anybody talks to you about the circular economy that's never been in a factory, go and find someone that has been in a factory. So this is me. This is in the cotton field with the farmer I work with. And I'm not so much going to talk about that, but I'm going to talk about what we could be doing by 2030 if we all work together. So I want to take you on a journey of just now having your imaginations set wild. We're doing things differently. We look at the scrubs in the hospital and we think, wow, they're just the beginning of a multi-loop circular materials flow. It's local grown cotton. It's fully made here. It's super high quality. So they just last a really long time and they're really comfortable to wear. It's not shedding plastic microfibers and they just last. Then eventually they're feedstock for another garment. They become a polo shirt in schools or healthcare or aged care. These teams of amazing people that go out and look after others in their homes. And when those shirts get tired, we take them back again. They're still a 100% natural fiber. We bio-refine them. Yes, that incredible pure cellulose can make the fiber that it makes. It could come back to the high street. It can be in hygiene products. It can be in wipes. It can be in consumables. It can be in incontinence pads and tubing grips. You know, those things we were scared of running out of? Our care essentials, we have to buy them anyway, in their millions, pads and swabs, bandages. But every part of them can be fully biodegradable or compostable, or even just so much safer to incinerate, a marvel of biofilms and biorefining. We now have a single-use health waste stream that is fully compostable. They said we couldn't do it. We've displaced a lot of icky and awkward landfill, captured nutrients, carbon and resources instead, and we've closed the loop. So that cycle we used before plastic, we've switched it on again, big time. And what's more, it's all our kids know. They know landfill, but that's a legacy that we've left them, and it's something we're no longer adding to. We have amazing collaborations between cotton, wool, timber, citrus, cane growing industries. We've partnered with Indigenous experts, finding and farming native plants with fantastic feedstock properties. These feed into these biorefineries that use virgin cellulose, agricultural waste and byproducts, and reclaim cloth feedstocks too, not just for ourselves, but for export. Yeah, export. The global demand for these renewable and recycled content just kept on growing, and we've responded. It's all renewably powered, part of directly regenerative ag systems, drawing down carbon, and people are fairly employed too. Seriously, it's how it works now. We keep track of it all, thanks to an incredible combination of science and technology, remote and satellite monitoring, forensic fiber due diligence, automated processing, even irrigation waters on the blockchain. Who would have thought it when we stepped into this decade? We'd come out leading the field in sustainable and regenerative textile and apparel materials systems, drawing down carbon to boot. Now we're licensing our knowledge and systems around the world, robot-assisted sorting lines, closed-loop processing, and trace element authentication. We made it easy to choose balance. No more time-poor parents having to sift the fine print in the supermarket. There's no ethical shopping guide because we don't need it. Of course, energy is needed. Of course, there's give and take in the system. But here's where the tech came in, and we kept track of it. We don't just hope it's all working, we know it. We've made it so the whole system is valued, and it's impossible to compete if your profit came from leaving a legacy of waste and permanent pollution. The waste drones pick up a few laggards now and again, but this huge and stunning land, just as we've tracked illegal logging, we've stopped the dumping too. A synergy of Indigenous and regional expertise, enhanced by smart tech drones and satellites. And while you may wonder about international trade, this of course is thriving. However, now, instead of an imbalance of exploitation and old school cheap labour and pollution-based systems, we've seriously brought about some justice. When we import products, whoever we work with and wherever they are, their systems and processes would pass muster here too. That's why we can compete. No more unfair employment, no more dead rivers or rapacious land clearing. It started with some pilots in 2022, combining waste, manufacturing, public and private procurement. It took courage. And now it's just one example of a thriving, creative and inclusive industrial design and manufacturing sector, thanks to the biggest revolution of them all. Technically, it was simple, but culturally, it was huge. We changed how we used finance. Yes, the bean counting revolution, where we finally linked the true cost of injustice to the cost of doing business and government. Value for money took on a whole new meaning and unleashed a revival of creativity, community, and technical collaboration. So you think this is pie in the sky? Would it ever be possible? Every technical use and process of fibres and textiles and renewable energy that I have just described exists commercially now. The level of automation is vast and growing, and we just need to choose to use it. So what do we need to do it? Apart from tenacity, determination, vision, and of course the will? Well, it's a whole host of things. It's obviously textile and garment manufacturing experts, spinning, weaving, knitting, dyeing, printing. But we also need packaging design, logisticians, engineers of every type imaginable, carbon trading people, urban and town planners, architects, government and corporate procurement, social and justice and ethical policies, industrial ecology and circular economy practitioners, business planning, investment modeling, creative storytellers, critically, designers will get nowhere if we make all this stuff ethically and net zero if it's not things that people actually want to buy and use and wear. And so really it's just a case of let's go. We don't need to wait for anything. We don't need to invent anything. We don't need to wait for somebody else in another country to work something out. We actually could just make the decision and get on with this and lead. And so that's what I started to suggest today, that it's actually sounds really overwhelming, but actually it's really hopeful because the answers are right there. We've just got to make a decision to choose to do it. And yeah, here I am working on it myself with Full Circle Fibres.
I just have a question. What is there right now in Brisbane or Southeast Queensland for the ordinary person to get rid of clothes that are, responsibly get rid of clothes that are like beyond repair? We all have them. We've worn a shirt out to its, and we've got enough rags. Because I know that H&M say you can bring a bag in and stuff, but I don't know what's really happening with that stuff. Like you can fill them up with bags. I just want to know your insight.
Oh, yeah, fantastic question. I don't have the answer you want, to be honest. We don't have all those answers yet. If it's wearable, yes, we know about giving it to charity. If it's fixable, if it's made of natural fibre, you can compost it. If it's got some mix of synthetic as well, and it's beyond reuse and rewear, then it really is landfill. If it goes to, there is one organisation at the moment, apparel, that is you can send stuff to and it rags them and makes insulation and things like that. They're down in Melbourne. I believe you can contact them and send them, a 10-kilo box of your completely unwearable textile waste. And so these things are beginning to change. It's still a down cycle, but at least it's a second life. So that's probably one of the only ones for that. But if you give your stuff to charity after what's sellable here, then they sort what's sellable overseas, and then they sort what's raggable overseas. To be honest, that whole sector is as big a modern slavery risk, if more, than the actual manufacturing supply chains themselves. So it's a fraught challenge right now. So the biggest challenge is to actually only buy it if you love it in the first place, which is hard.
Thank you so much, Muriel. That was really fantastic. I'm sorry I had to run out of the room briefly. But what I loved about your talk was that it just makes it so much more real when it's not just fashion. We're actually talking about the fabric community, the textile community across the whole economic cycle. Yep, sorry.
Yeah, you just reminded me of one thing to say. We're actually only missing one step. We actually have a lot of textile manufacturing here. It's a muscle, use it or lose it. And while we don't have the whole lot, every time you buy local made of anything, you are supporting keeping manufacturing here so that it's here to be part of the remanufacturing economy as those feedstocks begin to come on stream. So while at the moment my own supply chain is virgin cotton and one stage happens overseas, I work with 8 factories here in Australia, and those factories need continuous business, just like farmers need continuous customers that keep the need to then employ and train the next generation. And our circular economy requires the manufacturing economy to be here.
Yeah, that's so important to suggest. Thank you so much, Muriel. That was really awesome. Do you want to come and fiddle with Matt's presentation, Kira? Matt's presentation. While I talk through our next speaker. So we've got Matt Panieri. Is it Panieri? No, Panieri. Panay. Oh my goodness, Panay from Social Traders here today to talk to us as well. Matt's a recent acquisition to our Brisbane ecosystem. But we're delighted to have him with us at long last. Alex from Social Traders has been, working on his little old lonesome with Nina in the background for some years to help us to understand social procurement and how we might be able to look through the lens of procurement as an opportunity for another economic lever in our quill of arrows that we float. But Matt is has spent the last 17 years working with legal aid, which is pretty incredible, Aboriginal legal services, and in government as well, through legal policy and leadership roles. He coordinated the participation of Northern Territory's largest legal service, the North Australian Aboriginal Justice Agency, in the Royal Commission to Detention and Protection of Children in the Northern Territory. Amazing. And has worked in the Northern Territory government to design and implement subsequent reform agenda. So this is a real policy moment for us, getting a policy boffin to come and speak to us about how do we change the economy for good, not evil. Woohoo. Let's hope he can help us to understand some of those long-term, short-term, mid-term and long-term policy levers like procurement, so that we can change the economy. And not just from a deficit model, not just from a model that says, how might we, offset some of the damage that we're doing through some of what how we're buying and the supply chains that we're engaging with, but how might we actually change the system through procurement? So Matt, if you could come up, that would be terrific. We're just downloading your presentation.
Thank you, Elise and Kira. So two amazing speakers with enormous depth of experience with social enterprise. Me, not so much depth of experience, but I've got a breadth of experience across a variety of sectors. And as Elise said, a big history in legal aid and government, predominantly up north, and working significantly with remote populations and remote Indigenous communities as well. So social procurement, I get the really sexy thing to talk about, social procurement. So I just want to start by also acknowledging the traditional owners of the country here, the Turrbal and Yagara people. I extend my respects to elders past and present, and I also just, I suppose, want to let people know of my personal commitment to voice truth and treaty. I think it's really important. Spent a lot of time, I have a lot of close Indigenous friends, and whilst they may have some different ideas about how those things will be implemented, the one thing that is a constant is that voice, truth and treaty is needed at, I think, not just a national level, but also at a state level across the jurisdictions as well. All right, so social traders. So I am going to make some assumptions, so pull me up if I say things that don't make any sense, because I'm assuming most people in this room would understand what a social enterprise is. But firstly, my arrows aren't working. So social procurement. Right, we'll start the presentation now. So I think I have the best job in the world. I know that sounds extremely weird. And if you said to me 4 years ago, Matt, you're going to be working in the procurement space, I would have said, no, I'm not. Because I'm not that type of person. But I've learned a lot over the last few years. I've done a social impact fellowship, studying an MBA in social impact. And I really do feel like my password, I won't tell you all of it, but it includes the words dream job. That's how much I like my job right now. Telling you anything else? So what do social traders do? Social traders' role is to unlock business for good by leading the charge for social enterprise procurement. So what does that mean? So social traders' role is really to connect business and government with social enterprises, and this is what unlocks the business for good and helps to create a more inclusive and equitable Australian society. So what is procurement? I'm just going to say if we're allowed to swear, buying shit. That's what procurement is, if you put it pretty simply. So our role is to help business and government and social enterprises to come together so that the supply chains of everybody is more social, and social benefit is embedded in supply chains rather than being an addition. Why did social traders do this? So social traders has been around since, or I think 2008, 2009. They do this because when they ask social enterprises what's the best role social traders can play in the industry, we used to do lots of other things as well. They said, social enterprises said they need access to markets. So this is our way of trying to provide access to markets for social enterprise. It's really hard to reach to press this arrow without moving my head and press the right button at the same time. All right, so I'll just really quickly move through these things. So what does social traders do? As I said, we enable business and government to create positive impact by deeply integrating social enterprises into the supply chain. We certify and strengthen social enterprises, which I'll talk a little bit about. And we advocate for government policy to support social enterprise procurement and social procurement more broadly. So the way I look at social enterprise procurement is, if social procurement is a pie, social enterprise procurement is part of that pie. Other types of procurement, Indigenous procurement, procurement of marginalised people, procurement of women-owned businesses, those kind of things, they all sit in the social procurement pie. Social enterprise is part of that. So we certify social enterprises. We think that's, I'm going to talk about data shortly, and we think that's a really important part of this whole ecosystem, is to have certified social enterprises, because it gives the market, the economy, a bit of certainty around whether, I think we've mentioned social washing a couple of times already. So we would say a social trader certification ensures that that is a genuine social enterprise and it's not social washing. So just very briefly around social enterprises, we've talked about it. Really, it's around purpose. They have to have income from trade and reinvest their profits in their purpose, in a nutshell. So just to give you a little perspective of the journey in Queensland and really around the world, we've talked about, Emma Kate talked about things are changing, there's momentum building, and Elise talked about that as well. So in Queensland, things are changing with the social enterprise strategy, the $8 million invested. Things really started to change in 2019. We had the Social Enterprise World Forum this year. Things started to change around the world significantly for large corporations around 2017, 18, 19, when some of the big CEOs and the business roundtables, etc., started talking about purpose stakeholders and not just profit in business. So there is momentum. Yes. All right. So very briefly, systems theory. It's really important to think about systems theory, I think, because social procurement is not the answer. Social procurement is part of an answer, it's part of a solution. Some of the things that we've been talking about today, it's around the pointy end, up around the conscious mental models. That's what has been talked about that needs to change. But some of the other stuff, the nitty-gritty that we were talking about, is the physical, the information, the patterns of behaviour, and the system structures as well. So procurement, social enterprise procurement fits down the less pointy end, but also for a social enterprise, for social procurement to become business as usual rather than business as unusual, then it probably needs a shift in the mental models as well. Just a bit of an idea of, so if we need to change minds, something I find really interesting is the breakdown of tangible and intangible assets. Don't roll your eyes. So intangible assets are things like human capital. Yeah. So in 1975, 83% of market value was in physical assets, tangible assets. So plant and equipment, trucks, buildings, etc., etc. And now in 2020, it's 10% is in physical, tangible assets, 90% is intangible. So I just point that out because I think it's really important to understand that we actually have an enormous opportunity to change people's minds and to change the behaviour of organisations, corporations, enterprises, because 90% of their value is in their people. So we've got a real opportunity to change the mind. You can't change the mind of a truck. So in 1975, we would have struggled, but now we've got 90% of the value of each organisation to work with. Just the State of Social Procurement report that was released last year. So business and government organisational drivers, organisational values and strategy, valued by 64%, government policies, 59%, customer expectations, 45%, and corporate public profile, 44%. So just with that systems thinking and systems change, at Social Traders, we look at changing systems. We look at having champions within the businesses and the purpose of the business. And I can go through that in a bit more detail if there's any questions, but I'll move on because I don't want to get lost. So I just wanted to go into some of our data, because one of the strengths of Social Traders is we have some really rich data, because when we certify social enterprises, we have a really deep understanding of how of their impact and how they make that impact. And so with the impact, what we've seen, so this is a snapshot from 2018 to 2021. Sorry, 2020. So $222 million was spent with social enterprises, and this led to 1,430 jobs for marginalised groups, people with disabilities, long-term unemployed, mental illness, 379,000 hours of training delivered to marginalised people, $13.3 million of community goods and services provided, $2.5 million donated to charity, and 5,000 tonnes of waste diverted from landfill. And so that data is really important because it tells us for every $100,000 that's spent, we can make almost one FTE for a marginalised group. We can deliver 400 training hours, around 400 training hours. An additional $26,000 in value in community goods and services provided to those that otherwise wouldn't have it. A couple of $1,000 donated to charity, and 156 tonnes of waste diverted. So we can really drill down, provide the value. One of the keys to social procurement as well is that we're not asking people to spend additional money. Social procurement is about the spend of the money that is already being spent, and it's just changing how you spend that money that is already being spent in the economy. To give you an example, so the Queensland government last financial year spent $19 billion on purchasing things. the Commonwealth government spent $54 billion on purchasing things. So there's enormous opportunity, even with small percentages. So 1% of 19 billion would be $190 million to social enterprises if 1% went to social enterprises in Queensland. Social Traders' stretch goal for 2030 is that we're in a position where $5.5 billion nationally is being spent on social enterprise procurement, and 44,000 jobs for marginalised groups are created through this. 2030. Just to give you an idea around, you know, this is a thing that's happening. It's a genuine movement, I suppose. So you can see the increase in spend by social traders, business and government members with certified social enterprises between financial years 2018 to financial year 2021. So the growth is pretty exponential, but there is enormous room for improvement in supporting social enterprises through procurement spends of others. I just wanted to give you, oh, that slide went a bit funny. I just want to give you a couple of examples of social procurement where the procurement has multiple positive impacts. So we've just had what our National Game Changer Awards, innovative partnerships between social enterprises and our business and government members. The winner in Queensland Northern Territory was Australian Spatial Analytics, who I think spoke at a previous forum. Yeah, and so they have a partnership with Ventia, which does many things, engineering. You might see the Ventia trucks around. They do all sorts of things with road telecommunications, lots of things, rolling out the NBN. So Ventia, ASA approached Ventia and gave Ventia the idea around employing some of their neurodiverse and data analysts. It started off as a very small project with a very limited scope, and really began with one data analyst being trained in the Ventia team, embedded in the Ventia team. That then quickly grew when they saw the how well it had worked. I should say the work that the data analyst was doing was work that was previously offshored. So it was bringing that work back on shore into Australia. And in less than a year, they've ended up with 10 data analysts. Some of them are now being employed on a permanent part-time basis with ASA, working with Ventia. Most of these people haven't had a permanent, very few of them have had employment at all before, other than through disability employment services. And so that's a really, and 30%, so the work that is being produced is, the output is 30% greater than what was happening when it was being outsourced. So it's actually a win-win-win for everybody. It's a win because the business is getting a financial benefit because it's the work's being produced at a greater rate. So Ventia has continued to support and have now deepen that partnership by funding a dedicated designer to work with ASA and continue to upskill the organisation. And so those kind of procurement partnerships that aren't just a transactional relationship are the type of things that we try to encourage, because that's how you embed the social benefits in business. Just another one I really quickly wanted to mention was the winner in New South Wales ACT was Too Good Co and Charter Hall. So Charter Hall owns buildings. Too Good Co works with marginalised women, survivors of domestic violence, provides them with support, employment, and as well as other supports. So Too Good Co successfully tendered to supply soap to Charter Hall, which they're Too Good Co are a social enterprise, and that's how they fund the work they do. The ways they fund the work they do. However, that gave the opportunity for the two of them to talk about how, because soap dispensers were a problem, and so a discussion between them led to a decision to try and design soap dispensers that were sustainable. And so they designed soap dispensers from plastic that has been reclaimed from the ocean. The only reason they could do that was because Charter Hall pre-purchased many thousands of them and invested money in the design phase. So again, a transactional relationship would have been just buying the soap, but the deeper partnership, which has led to much more social impact, is the relationship that allowed Charter Hall to invest more money, invest up front in something innovative, which was the design of the soap dispensers, which are now available for Too Good Co to sell to other organisations as well. So I was just talking before at the table. I think one of the really important things is crucial to social traders, and kind of what our campaign has been recently, is around we want this to be business as usual, and it isn't business unusual until it is, and it's being business as unusual, as unique. Whilst that's good in the beginning, our goal is for it to be the business as usual. And I think the kind of analogy that I thought of was when I was young and I was into grunge music, and grunge music was the alternative, and got a bit upset when it became mainstream. But it was important that it became mainstream, because then everybody got to listen to grunge music. So a little bit with social procurement as well. We don't want it to stay the little cool thing. We want it to be business as usual for everybody. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Matt, and thanks, Muriel. I think we had some questions online around stop the share. Yep, wonderful. Okay. Strong economy helps us buy good shit. Yeah, absolutely. Question for Muriel. In our household, we really do talk about these things in our values, but it's hard to compete against the onslaught of global consumption narrative, particularly promoted by Instagram influencers. How do I talk to my 17-year-old daughter to counter this in a way that's not ranting? Have put her onto the app Good For You, which rates ethical and sustainable fashion. Is that any good? Are there any others? You know what? I think we might take that very quickly, but then have a conversation offline, because that's very much a B2C and rather than a system sort of change approach. But very quickly, yeah.
I am great that you want to have that conversation. I don't actually like that app. That's a whole long story. It's a good conversation starter, but really the number one thing is, if you don't love it, don't buy it. If you can't imagine wearing it at least 30 times, ideally more like 300 times, then don't buy it. Our biggest challenge is volume. And actually that's a really simple message. And obviously shop secondhand first. So worry less about the apps and more about just finding stuff that's really high quality that you're going to love to wear a lot of times.
Thanks for that. And then is there another question here? Yes, and there's the reminder for the document there for the Google Docs for everybody. Thank you so much to our speakers today. Our major questions that we're going to put to the groups now, and in online, you're going to be using the Google Docs. In the room here, we're going to be using some pieces of paper, good old-fashioned stuff. There are 3 questions we're going to pose to you now after the provocations that we've heard. What is the economy for? Is it driving change? Is it just to help us buy our next Lamborghini, or is it actually going to be making a difference? The next question is, what are the economic levers, short, mid and long term? Matt was talking about social procurement there. I can actually see a time in the not too distant future, and the Olympics coming up 2032, if we use this as a catalyst for change rather than just as something that, you know, is nice to have. It's nice to have the numbers. It's nice to have that, you know, positive affirmation that numbers are going up. That's great. But the difference that it makes back to the community, at the very minimum, when you buy from the social enterprises, 1 in 3 back to the community. There's a tidal wave of impact that comes back to the community and to our planet when you actually start to measure the impact beyond just that single local economy scale. So what are some of those economic levers that we can shift in the short, the mid and the long term? And then some of those global challenges and opportunities that we were mentioning, how do we actually shift the lever for us here in Queensland, looking at the Olympics in 2032? What are the major challenges and opportunities that we might like to put our focus and energy to make sure that we can build that regenerative future for our communities? In the room, we're going to break for some lunch online. You can go grab yourself a cup of tea, grab something, a snack or something, and we'll probably meet back here. It's 11:30 now. We'll probably meet back together at 12 o'clock online, if you can just sort of take a break there. We're going to break here, have some food, have a ponder about those questions that we're posing, and start to write down some of the things that are on our minds that have got us in the mood. Fingers crossed. Paul, yes?
Those online, because we're not in physical space, I might suggest that we might have a chat about whether we want to do that discussion now or have a break.
Yep.
But we might just talk about that in a second, but I won't bother the room with that.
Fantastic.
Thanks.
Awesome. So everyone in the room, grab a snack to eat, and thanks everybody on the line here. We'll pause this and we'll see you back here a little bit later. Thanks.
So our small group was energetically picking up on the theme of biomimicry and nature having multiple value streams of assets and worth and value, from animals to, yes, people, but even items, inputs, throughputs and outputs, the life of a t-shirt that we might purchase, that needs to be considered as part of the overall system. And a lot of the First Nations principles around biomimicry and how can we value all of the, not just the economy. We not acknowledge that the word economy comes from oikos, which means home, which is more about ecology. So it's actually, we're talking a lot about those sorts of principles about the interconnectedness of the nested systems. First Nations understand this, and we really need to move away from that Western linear scientific decoupling of nature and now look at the value and the assets of measures and mapping and tracking, the accountability of it, and put it back into the circular donut economic measuring and mapping. And also that some of the principles of biomimicry, the ethos of understanding ourselves within the place, reconnecting with nature. The more we inherently connect with nature, we actually participate in powerful exchanges that change the nature of value exchange. And then, but the more we emulate nature, the more we respect and reflect natural values, ecological innovations, collaborations, cross-pollination, and so forth. We're saying that the economic model has brainwashed people a lot, but it's the everlasting model, which is the First Nations always model, is what we really need to tune back into. And we were just starting to talk about how the policy levers that big government stepping in with COVID, with bushfires, with flood, where they've stepped in, we've thought, okay, there's security, someone else will fix it. But in the places where things fell apart, like in Lismore, the community have stepped in because the sovereignty didn't happen, the security didn't happen, the authorities didn't arrive, so the communities participated and got together. And we were acknowledging that when people get together, they build those connections and community engagements, they share more, they redistribute more, and it's less about being consumers and taxpayers, and it's more about being sustainable rather than just expecting security. We participate in sovereignty. So there's this nice balance happening there. Does that reflect some of what we said? What else was raised that anyone in our group thought might be?
In there, Paul, what you raised was really interesting and reminded me of the slide that Matt showed as we moved the assets, that, you know, that slide that you showed, Matt, with the assets being quite large, the tangibles versus the intangibles, and how we've actually moved toward an intangible resource in our workforce is what that was representing to me. Capitalising, using that word with a cheeky smile, capitalising on that is that we've got a big opportunity. So that global challenges and opportunities, there's an opportunity to hopefully capture the intention, the values, and the mechanisms for change that could happen in that 90% or so of human capital, of human relationships, of the intangibles, and that small amount of the 10%, I think you mentioned at last count, of the tangible assets. We should be using that as an opportunity now, because we've obviously got a big sway toward the human element there. How might we reflect the natural values and the natural assets and the natural requirement for us to connect with nature in that regard, rather than that 10% of asset class and the tangible nature of that? Just something to throw in there, reminding me of Matt's slide.
And there. Gail was also suggesting that in the way she thinks, and many of us think, it's all about systems, and actually that there's actually some value in holding on to those labels like assets. But if we really revalue those assets, that could be quite interesting. And Fiona had some tremendous thought about the importance of biomimicry. And we talked about localism, and there's also a concept called cosmo-localism, which is that things that are distributed and light, like ideas, that 90% of capital which is moving toward the intangible, that can be done internationally, but things that are heavy and dense, that have embodied materials, should be produced locally wherever possible. Cosmo-localism is actually quite an interesting theme as well. But what else from our group?
Well, I just wanted to bring Mark in here from Green Roads. You might like to step up, Mark, to the microphone to answer this. Mark was just saying before that the company that Green Roads is employed or has their mechanism under is actually European by nature. And the way that they're measuring impact is a particular way from a European perspective. And we were just having this conversation about how do we re-measure impact from an uber localist sort of level. Do you want to just step up and just give us some of that insight there from what Green Roads is doing and measuring impact from your guys' perspective?
Sure. My name is Mark Smith. I'm the Corporate Social Responsibility Manager for Hanson, so one of Australia's largest construction companies involved with a whole heap of projects around Brisbane. We have a subsidiary in Alex Fraser. Alex Fraser has a brand called Green Roads, which uses recycled content into roads. but a challenge that that business has is getting local councils and others that procure that kind of service to trust recycled content, have faith and value in it. There's a whole heap of reasons culturally, less so scientifically, I think, around why people don't support a lot of that stuff. What I was raising is that being owned by a European company, Heidelberg Cement, one of the largest companies in the world, they have a number of expectations on what we do in the corporate social responsibility space, stuff that they will and won't fund. And a lot of that stuff has to do with us doing activities that are currently popular and currently can be measured, which generally sit in like a sustainability context of CO2 emissions or reduced water use, these things that we're able to easily tick off. One of the challenges that I have in my role is that we also need to be looking at stuff that's around the social and community benefit space. And that stuff tends to be very difficult to measure. But also one of the other challenges we have, at least that we have, is as a European company, they've set some parameters around what we should be doing, which don't take into account our First Nations or Indigenous people, because that's not really something that a European-based business probably had to consider when originally formulating some of this stuff. So, yeah.
Thanks, Mark. I just found that really interesting because, often in social enterprise, what we do is we measure the impacts and we completely balance. It's like a tightrope or a scale. On one hand, we measure the income, and then the other hand, we measure the impact that we're creating. And it's this constant tightrope of trying to balance the two. What's the income? How's the impact being measured? What are we doing? What are we giving back? How do we actually supply the impact through the profit that we're creating and redirect that? So it's just a really interesting juncture there. And I think measuring the impact on the natural world and the way that we inform ourselves about what we're measuring and how we're measuring it really can stand up in this space. Like, what is the economy for? What's driving the economy? Why are we measuring things that we're measuring, and how we're measuring it to make sure that we're amplifying the quadruple bottom line values of environment, culture, society, and what's the other one? What's the other one? The quadruple one.
Social,
culture, society,
social, economic, environmental, cultural.
There you go. I got it. I spat it out. Was there anything else from your group before you jump on and either finish up your chats and while we start to get into our chats here?
I'd like to ask the others to give any other feedback, but we did suggest under the strong economy that it's not about having more. It's actually about encouraging all living things to flourish. Anyone else from our group, other thoughts that came up so far? And we really only went through the first two questions. Fiona?
No, I think you pretty much summarised it, Paul. Thank you.
Gail?
That's good.
Okay.
Alrighty, well, we're going to leave you guys now and we're going to take the floor here and start to answer some of the questions. Are you wrapping up now, or did you want to come back for seconds?
Are you going to answer the questions together?
We just go into groups now, and we just address the questions that we want to in the groups. It's no real kind of like. We might go
into either a chat room or breakout room, or we'll probably just wrap up online. So maybe we.